How are you, sir?
I am much better than yesterday, so thanks for agreeing to move this. My voice probably still sounds a little funky, but
Only slightly. At least I can only pick up
cool.
bits. Did you have a cold, like a bad vocal issue?
Yes. I never really got like full on flu type sick, but basically was completely drained and um yeah, without being too gross or graphic, my
I
my voice
appreciate
was
that.
my voice was affected.
Yeah, I've had a lot of meetings at our church lately, and the main pastor that I've had most of those meetings with hasn't been there for the last week because he's been out with the flu. So I don't know how many times I meet everybody else that's supposed to be in the meeting. I was like, yes, he needs to stay away. Like, go away, mister. I don't I don't want to be anywhere near you right now. That's the last thing I want is the flu.
Right. Well, fortunately, through the magic of internet, you are still not able to catch my cold, so
Good. Well, in theory, the last company I worked for was a virtual company, and I am convinced that somehow I would still catch colds from people. I don't know how that worked. Someone would be talking about how they had something massive and it was completely wrecking their lives, and then it seemed like a couple of days later I would come down with it. I was like, what on earth? This is just, I work from home. I should not be able to pick these things up nearly as frequently as if you're in like a, cubicle nation. Just the way it goes. Sometimes they just kind of sweep the whole Midwest, I think.
yeah, that's I think a big part of it is in the Midwest right now. It doesn't know whether it wants to be fall or winter.
Yeah, what's with that?
It was like 65 and sunny the other day, and that's kind of when I first started noticing this, and now today it's like 35 degrees. And
Yes.
there's frost on
Yes.
everything this morning, so
Welcome to Midwest weather.
and I'll apologize in advance for any gross noises I make that you may have to edit out.
Okay. All right. That's fine with me. You don't know how many of my own coughs and pauses I edit out.
All right.
Do you want to jump into our follow up?
Yeah, let's do it. So you've got a couple of them here first, so let's
Yeah. The first one of those uh, from the last show, I had put down that I wanted to start writing down what my long term expectations. Wow, that was one of those, I don't know if I'm saying this right, moments. So, writing down my long term expectations on commitments, or in my case, projects, whenever I create them. And I started doing this, but I haven't closed any of those yet. So, I don't really have much to report on that one other than I have started collecting that information. And if you're, for the listeners here, if you haven't listened to the last episode, what I'm getting at there is that we talked about how if you write down what you expect and how you plan for a project to end, if you write down what you think the end of that project will look like, and then compare that to how it actually turned out at the end of that process, that you can learn an awful lot about yourself and how you operate and how you think. So that's the idea behind what I'm doing, and I have started the first half of that, Mike, and have not finished any of those projects to know how it works.
that's a very appropriate pre-podcast follow-up given what we're talking about today.
I know. It's interesting. So that's, yeah, that'll make sense later. The second one that I have down is the daily rule of three. And the concept there is that writing down and people talk about this in the productivity space quite a bit, the three MITs, or most important tasks. And I just started doing it on paper. I've written a couple articles about that process here lately, but it's one that I've been doing, and it has a lot of power, I think. It's been working really well. This is one that I for sure will continue to do. It seems like some of these action items, Mike, I end up starting them. They're great for a couple, 3 weeks, and then they're gone. And this is one I think is going to stick for quite a while because it's been extremely helpful.
Cool. So my turn, huh?
Yes, I'm done. You go.
Okay. So my first follow-up item was to know my strengths, which my version of doing that was going to take the StrengthsFinder assessment, which I did. So my top 5 strengths, according to StrengthsFinder 2.0, are achiever, input, strategic, learner, and responsibility. So I have to now read through the book and identify what those actually mean. I have a little bit of a vague idea of what they mean, but I want to dive into the specifics. And then also, I'm going to make my wife take this as well.
See, that's what we did. My wife and I both took it. And it's extremely helpful to see that, I think, because you get to understand how each other thinks and operates. And there's a marriage conversation for you if you want one.
Right. Yeah. So that's the idea. Follow up to the follow up, I guess, would be that I actually researched my strengths a little bit more, and then
Nice.
also Rachel takes the assessment, and then we talk about our similarities and differences, and how we can become a better team, family team, um, knowing what we know about how each other works. So you don't have to put all of that for follow up for next time.
It's like
Just
I'm sitting
know
here.
that
How
just
am I
know that
gonna
I
bring this
am
up?
I am moving forward on this one. The second one too, I'm moving forward on this one, but this one doesn't even have a definition of done. From if you're following the Agile Scrum methodology, you'd be very, very angry when you see my follow up for this one, which is just take responsibility for relationships. But I have noticed that as I have emphasized this, when there is friction in a relationship, and in the past maybe I would have, because I tend to see things very black and white. It's either right or it's wrong. And so kind of what I've learned here, along with some other things that I've read and some other experiences that I've had, is that sometimes the right thing is being willing to say that you were wrong, even if you don't really feel that you were wrong. Because there's always 2 sides to every story, and the relationship or the person is more important than you being right all the time. And so I've taken that approach a couple times, and I think there's been a couple situations where if I would not have remembered this, that would have changed how I responded in those situations, and I would have gotten the same friction that I have always gotten. But I was able to avoid some of that because I took this approach. And it's not going to happen all the time. I'm going to make mistakes. There's going to be times where, even though I've said this now publicly on a podcast, and there's a bunch of people who can take me to task for this when they see me mess up, including my wife who listens.
Hi, Rachel.
I do believe that there is going to be, I've already seen it, and I believe there's going to continue to be progress in this direction as long as I keep this in front of me, I guess, if that makes sense.
I had a wise mentor at one point that I had a great conversation with, but he made the point, because I was talking about some relationships that I was struggling with, and there was some things that the other person had done that made things quite difficult. And he told me, he's like, you know what, you go through that relationship and there might be some strain there. It may not be your fault, but you can be responsible. Like, it may not be you may not be the one who caused it. You're not the one at fault there, but you can make a decision on what you're going to do with it. And that's something I've struggled with for a long time, but it's something that always comes to mind whenever I talk about or hear someone talk about relationships and responsibility with them. But it just seems to me that there's a big difference between, who is the one who actually caused the issue versus who's the one who's going to take responsibility for doing something about it. Do you get the difference between those two?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that you described that way better than when I did it.
I've had a couple years to marinate on that one.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that's something that I've seen played out in Asian efficiency. And one of the things that I really like about the company is they take that approach. It doesn't matter who caused the issue. Let's just figure out how to fix it.
Right.
And then, like you're saying with the responsibility, what you're saying is not taking responsibility for, yes, I did this thing wrong, so I can be punished, but being willing to jump in and help be a part of the solution.
And I think so much of taking responsibility and making decisions on what you do can tie in quite well with the book that we read for today's podcast, which, how'd you like that segue?
Nicely done.
So this was your choice, so I'll let you introduce it.
All right. So yeah, we read the 12-week year, and I don't have the book in front of me, so I don't have the author.
Why do you do that?
I'm sorry.
Gosh, Mike.
Oh, you know what? This is my brain being sick. I can just go to the notes that I took for this. Yes, Brian
Mm-hmm.
Moran and Michael uh, Lennington.
Yes,
Okay. So
I think so.
yeah, and most of the books that I pick, they've been things that I've I've heard about for a long time, and the authors I'm pretty well familiar with them. This one I was not. This was one that actually I've seen a lot of people talk about inside the Asian Efficiency Dojo. In fact, there's a lot of people who publicly post their 12-week year progress inside the dojo so that other dojo members can hold them accountable for what they are actually getting done. But I had no idea really what to expect with this, other than I've heard lots and lots of good things from the community about this and decided that I should probably find out what all the buzz was about. So what better way to do that than to drag you into it with me, Joe?
Well, I'm glad you did. And I should point out, I did this book a little differently, Mike. Because typically when I read these, I finish it like the day or two before we're going to record. And given the last one we did, Managing Oneself, that one was so short and I was able to read it so quick that I actually read this one before I read that one. And part of the reason I did that is because I knew there's a lot of people that get super excited about this. And a lot of people have their methods of putting it in place. And I see a lot of the reports because I do some stuff in the dojo as well. And it's a fun community. But I see those posts and I was curious what they were. So I was kind of anxious to get to this book. So I think if you hadn't picked it, I might have at some point. And so anyway, what I'm getting at is that I finished reading this one about 3 weeks ago instead of 2 or 3 days ago. And part of the reason I wanted to do that, it was intentional. It wasn't just because I had some extra time, but it was because I wanted to make an attempt. I knew ahead of time I was going to try to put this in place. And I wanted to get a little bit of familiarity with working the actual system before we had a chance to talk about it. Maybe that'll ruin my opinion on it. Maybe not. But it was at least something I did a little different. And I wanted to pose that before we jumped in.
Nice. Yeah. So, I mean, you've taken it farther than I have then. I finished reading this book actually last week when I was traveling to well, at the time that we're recording this, last week, I had attended the Sean West conference. And the
Oh,
Sean
right.
West conference was awesome. The whole idea was think bigger. And I met a lot of people there, a lot of very interesting people who are doing a lot of very interesting things. And Sean West, or Sean McCabe is the guy behind it. He has really built a really solid and very encouraging community there as well. So it was kind of cool it was a small conference. It was only like 100 people, but a bunch of people that were in the same space. And as I'm attending that conference, thinking bigger, I'm reading at the same time, finishing reading at the same time this 12-week year, and a lot of synergy between those two, a lot of the same approaches and even some of the messaging. So a little bit different approach than yours because I haven't implemented it yet, but I'm super excited about this, and I definitely am going to, well, we'll get to our takeaways, I guess, at the end, but definitely
Right.
going to apply at least parts of this.
Right.
So let me start here. I know you put the thing about the vision, but I want to just share this quote from page 3, which I thought was awesome. And this should be really at the beginning of every single one of these books that we read, or something like this. It says, one of our clients is a large insurance agency with more than 2,000 agents. Within the company, there is one agent who is a perennial top producer year in and year out. As you might expect, over the years, other agents have asked if he would share his approach with them. Without hesitation, the top producer would take time out of his busy schedule and walk them through exactly what he did to create his success. Do you know how many people replicated his success? You guessed it, 0. He now refuses to share his secret because no one follows through with what he teaches them. And my response to that was, amen, brother.
It's true.
It
It's
really
true.
set the tone for the whole book that we're going to share this with you. And I think this is cool in book format. This is, I mean, there's different avenues that this information can take. You can learn stuff by listening to a podcast. You can learn stuff by reading a book. You can learn stuff by going to a conference. You can learn stuff by taking a video course. And this I thought was very appropriate. It's right at the beginning. And he's basically saying, look, we could do this one-on-one with you and teach you all this stuff because we've done that with other people and we know that this works. But if it doesn't work, it's because you're not doing anything with it, not because something wrong with the method. So it's like, are you going to take this seriously or not? You know, if you want results, then you've got to follow through, which really is the principle behind any of the books I would say that we've read so far.
And I think maybe slightly under the surface of Bookworm, that's kind of what we're doing with the podcast, at least you and I participating in it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it's more of, okay, here's a book I've read, and then let's talk about it, and then make a plan on what we're going to do with it, as opposed to just something new to know, more information to store into our brains. Like, do something about it.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. I think I put it as synthesize what I'm learning.
Yeah. So to kind of help people understand 12-week year and what that is, it's a process of obviously 12 weeks. And in this book, Brian and Michael take us through the process of understanding how a 12-week period, so 3 months, is better as a planning time segment as opposed to a full 12-month year. So if you get the translation there, 12 months down into 12 weeks. And the premise is that you can get 4 times as much stuff done in a year if you take an entire year and condense it down into 12 weeks. And part of the rationale that they give for being able to do that is that so many organizations and corporations and groups in general, everybody wants to put goals at 12 years. We like to use the calendar year. It never works. Like I've been through, I don't know how many times I've put these things together at different companies or even for myself, and most of the work ends up getting done October, November, December, because you see the end of the year coming and, oh crud, now I got to get this done. And that sense of urgency is what they're trying to take advantage of and duplicate 4 times over in a year, as opposed to just that last 12-week period in the year.
Yeah, the key phrase is do away with annualized thinking and replace it with periodization. And the idea behind that is that periodization, like you were talking about, is a short enough time frame where it still elicits action. You can't afford to put things off for a week or two, because if you view it as a 12-week segment, that's like 1/6 of your time now that you've wasted. So, whereas if you were taking the full calendar year, a week or two, no big deal. I've still got 11 months to accomplish this. So breaking it down into those smaller sprints, if you will, it's kind of like a in-between personal application of the Scrum project management philosophy, if you want to think of it that way, where it's not like every 2 weeks or anything like that, but definitely some of the same principles apply, where you don't want to just take a look at the big picture, because if you do it that way, like you said, you're going to put things off and you're not going to take action on them. And he talks about the reason why this is on page 4. He says, we don't have a knowledge problem. We have an execution problem. It's not what you know. It's not even who you know. It's what you implement that counts. And a lot of people, he says in the book, know what to do. They just don't do it.
Yeah. And I think this is a lot of what corporations try to do. So coming from that corporate background, we did the annual goals. And in one case, I was setting my annual goals that needed to be done by December, but I was setting them in I think it was September is when I was setting them. And that was just luck of how I shifted positions and everything else. And I still hit my goals, even though they were they were probably a full 12-month worth of goals, but I still managed to do them in 3.5, 4 months. So it's like, okay, that'll make you stop and think about, if I can pull that off, then what happens the other 6, 7 months out of the year? Like, what am I doing in that amount of time? It just seems like so many times people try to put together, New Year's resolutions, and you get the full on mission for the year. It just seems like most of the time they fail. I don't know why I've got that sense. It just seems like whenever that stuff comes up, it just doesn't stick.
No, you're right. I mean, at Asian Efficiency, we teach rituals, and that's because habits have a somewhat negative connotation because they don't stick, and especially like New Year's resolutions. Come January 1st, the gym will be full with all the people who made resolutions that they're going to work out and they're going to be healthy this year. But within 3 weeks, it's dwindled by 80% and it's back to the regulars. And that's because you don't create the consistency that you need to keep moving forward with these things. And that's that's the main thrust of this book is you're gonna work backwards. You're gonna talk from what you really want to accomplish over this 12-week period, and then you're gonna identify what you want to accomplish each of those weeks. But then really what it comes down to is, are you going to create the space on your calendar, because all of the things you have to do are going to take place within this context of time. So if it's not on your calendar, it really doesn't exist. You're not going to do it. You're going to have an intention to do it, but you're not going to follow through. And just like those people who leave the gym at the end of January, you're not going to actually get your butt to the place where you can actually put in the work.
Right.
So
Right.
I really like that approach. And I think if you take that approach, it really isn't that hard. It's just you have to build up that routine, that ritual of consistently doing those little things that are going to produce the results. And then that's where the compound effect kicks in, because if you do those little things over and over and over again, you will see the results.
Jumping back a little bit, if you go to the beginning of this book, and we see this in a lot of the books we've read, Mike, and this is why I wrote it down. It seems like a very large percentage of these books that we've read talk about developing your mission, finding your vision in life, or developing your life goals. Like, okay, let's notice the theme here across all these books. What's the recurring thread? You have to know why you exist. And I think if you look at the sheer volume of times that we've run across us, even in the short period that we've been doing this podcast, the number of books that we've gone through, which really isn't that many. I mean, compared to what some people read in a year, or what most people read in a year, it's pretty significant. But in the grand scheme of things, this is number 14. It's really not 14 books. It's really not that many books. And even in that, they're calling out how important this life mission is, which would make you think, this is quite important. Maybe I should finally figure this out.
Right. Yeah, he says on page 21 that a passion crisis is really a vision crisis, that you've lost your why. And the whole thrust of the conference that I went to was, the theme of the conference was think bigger. And one of the things that Sean McCabe said during his session is that you have to normalize your vision. You want a goal which is as big as it can be and still inspire action, but then you have to verbally state this goal over and over and over again. So one of the things, it's kind of like not an inside joke, but it's something that like him and his team will do, is they'll just casually say $1 million is not a lot of money, because they want to get to the point where they believe that $1 million is not a lot of money, because their vision is so much bigger than that. But if you don't have that vision, or your vision isn't big enough, then it's not going to inspire you to take action on it. And they talked a lot about, maybe we'll add this to the list at some point, the 10X rule by Grant Cardone. And basically the premise there, and what Sean was saying from the stage, is whatever your goal is, 10X it. Make it really, really big, because the sky is the limit when it comes to what you are capable of. Like you were talking about, you accomplished a year's worth of projects or objectives in 3 months. That is sustainable, but you have to set up the framework, and that's where the 12-week year comes in to help you do that. And it's the vision that's going to keep you driving towards the point where you actually accomplish that.
I think if you go into the details of the 12-week year, so if we just kind of walk through that process, because I think the rest of this will make a lot more sense, because most of our notes are around how to actually accomplish this as opposed to what it is. So I think going through the actual process, the way I interpreted it, Mike, and all the listeners, is that what you need to do is figure out what your goals are going to be for the 12 weeks. So you set aside when you're going to start. You go through all of your areas in your life. So we've talked about like areas of responsibility and life hotspots in the past. You go through those, determine what your life goal is for those areas, and then based on those, set goals for the next 12 weeks. And don't just stop there. Actually plan out what needs to happen each week to get you there. And if you do that whole process and then each week review what it is you need to do that week in order to hit those goals, you profit. Like there's
Yep.
the end of it. Like that's the whole process. And something I wrote down here is that the 12-week year, to me, seems to translate extremely well to the Horizon 3 if you go to getting things done, transfer over other systems. The Horizon 3 process within GTD, in theory, is, if I'm recalling correctly, it's roughly your 1 year. Like I've heard David Allen say, I think in the past, like 9-month to like 14, 15-month goals. But to me, it seems like if you translate that down to 12 weeks and work with it from there, it seems to work really well, at least in my experience over the last 3-ish weeks, just using it for that process. It was a pretty easy and seamless transition for me anyway. But that's, okay, I've been rambling here for a little bit. But to me, that's how that whole 12-week year process works and how it can translate into like my current system, which I'm pretty heavy on GTD.
Yeah.
Does that all make sense?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I think really though that you could apply the 12-week year concept to however far you want to go, whichever horizon you want to use, and then you can work backwards from there. So
it just seems like so many of the systems and the methodologies out there, they talk a lot about the day-to-day. That seems like most of what they're talking, like, here are the tips and tricks on how to get your day in place. But this is bigger than that. It's this. I think this is the first real true, the real base system I've ever seen that's specifically geared towards something beyond today. I think.
yeah, that's interesting. I didn't really see that when I read through it, but I can see where that would make sense. Really though, what I think the benefit of the 12-week year is, I mean, so if you were to read the book, what you're going to see is some stuff that you can implement in how you plan your week, things that you can add to your calendar explicitly that will help you accomplish what you want to accomplish by the end of the 12-week period. And there's a lot of details there, but essentially that's what it is. And then that 12-week period, really what you want to do is you want to consistently stack successful 12-week periods on top of one another. And you could extend that out as far as you want. You could extend that out 9 months. You could extend that out 14 months. You could extend that out a lot further, I think. One of the things that I heard recently was picture yourself in 20 years, but not just at a broad general sense, but 20 years from now, what does successful Joe Bulig do when he wakes up in the morning? What does his daily routine look like? Where does he live? What kind of car does he drive? What sort of marriage does he have? Like, really picture the details and create that vivid picture of where you want to get to in the future. And I think 20 years is great. Like, that's far enough out there where you can really apply some of those big goals. Like you could say, well, in 6 months I want to be able to do this, but that's not realistic. So 20 years is far enough out there where you can really think big. But then when it comes to implementation to get there, all you've got to do then is you've got to follow through and you've got to work the system and you've got to consistently do the right things. Like, that is not only plausible, it is probable. Like, you want to get to the point where that goal is not something that's just way out there. One of the things, this is from later on in the book, but there's a process that he talks about you go through when you have these big goals. I think it's from page 81. He says, first it's impossible, then it's possible, then it's probable, then it's a given. So you don't ask how, but you ask what if, and then next you ask how might I. So you don't want to start asking that too soon, but you want to frame it in a way where this is not just some wild pipe dream where, yeah, it'd be great if I won the lottery sort of a thing, but you have to really get to the point where you believe that this is possible. And from the context of this book, it's the 12-week year if you implement this, and ultimately the devil's in the details. Like, will you actually follow through with this? Because if you follow through with it, you will get the results. It's simple, but it's not easy. Like, all you have to do is do what you know you're supposed to do. And if you do that consistently, but most people won't, then you will get the results. And the 12-week year kind of gives you the framework that you need to create the space to do that.
I think that's something I struggle with. Okay, I wrote this plan down. Am I going to stick to it? Like, I make a commitment with somebody else. It's on my calendar and it'll happen, period. Like, it's not a negotiable. I will do whatever I can in order to make sure that happens. If I make a commitment and it involves somebody else, that's just the way it works. If I do the same thing for myself, for some reason, it's okay to alter that or just not do it. And convincing myself to follow through on it, that's a lot of the tricks and the tips that I always try to figure out is, okay, how can I force myself to do what I've planned? Because if I follow the plan, I'm good, but I don't always stick true to it. Like, I always seem to want to float with it.
Right. But if you do follow through with it, then once you do it, then that gives you confidence that you can do it again. And that's where the neuroplasticity thing that I wrote down comes in. On page 23, he defines neuroplasticity as our brain's ability to change, and it does so based on how you use it. So that's why the 12-week concept is so important, because you have to stretch yourself and push yourself for those 12 weeks. But at the end of those 12 weeks, once you get there, you are now in a better position to do that again. So if you consistently do that, you are consistently pushing what your brain and your body is capable of doing. You will see growth, and this will become easier and easier.
It's interesting that you brought up the neuroplasticity thing, because and we'll talk about this later, the book that we're reading following this, I've started getting into that, and it covers that quite a bit. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I haven't started that one yet, but I've seen this play out, at least I believe I have, in my own life, where, like, I've told my story before, where I started getting up at 5 a.m. to start writing, and then I would go into the office, and then I would go to a coffee shop, and I'd work some more. And sometimes I get the response like, well, how could you do that? Like, I don't believe that I could physically put in that much time every day. And it wasn't that I just all of a sudden decided, okay, I'm going to put in this huge amount of effort. First of all, like we were talking about at the beginning, I had a vision. I knew that I wanted a future where I could work remote and I could have a flexible schedule. And if I decided that on this given day, I wanted to go on a field trip with my boys because we homeschool, that I could decide that. That was really important to me. That was the driving force behind everything, is I pictured the time and the day, the situation where I had that flexibility. But then it was doing just a little bit more and a little bit beyond what I had been capable of previously. So for anyone who knew me in college, getting up at 5 a.m., that was not something that I was capable of when
That was a bedtime, not a get up time.
Right. I was definitely a night owl. And so the fact that, like, I became a morning person, that blew some people's minds. But it's the vision that drove that. And then it's just getting up 5 minutes earlier, 5 minutes earlier, 5 minutes earlier. And then you consistently get up 5 minutes earlier. Pretty soon, getting up at 5 a.m. is easy. And then once you start going to the coffee shop, in my case, to write for an hour, you get done. First time you're like, wow, that really was hard. I can't believe that I wrote for a whole hour. A couple of weeks later, you're like, oh man, the hour's up already. I wish I could write for 2 more hours because I'm in the zone. So I've seen where, like, just for me personally and the type of creative work that I'm involved in, I believe that I've seen that in my own life, the neuroplasticity and my ability to produce not only at a consistent level for a long period, but also kind of going back to like the whole deep work conversation, like the journalistic approach, kind of on demand. Uh, and I really don't know how to explain this, but I know that I'm not the only person who is able to do that. I think it was Stephen King who talked about, maybe from like The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. He's like, an amateur writes when they feel inspired, a professional writes regardless, or something like that. I'm messing up the
Right.
quote, but like you just show up and you do it, and it gets easier.
I think it was Drew Kaufman at one point. He had an article that he wrote about how he goes to a coffee shop in the morning, grabs an espresso, and he writes. And then the next day, he goes to a coffee shop, he grabs an espresso, and he writes. And doing that every single day meant that eventually his mind just followed the pattern. And if he had an espresso, he immediately started thinking in writing mode. And it just starts to work that way. And it's interesting how our brains adapt to things like that. I think it's extremely helpful, obviously.
Mhm.
It's something that can help us to develop a habit that's good if we're willing to let it, but it can also go the negative way, of course. You get into some infinity apps that just go on and on and on and on, and you got this really bad habit, and you end up losing a lot of time. But I think if you're able to leverage the power of that, you end up being able to do like what you're talking about, building these habits where your mind just takes over, and this is what comes next, and this is what I do. And that's what Brian and Michael talk a little bit about this with time blocking. They brought it's hard to go through a book like this and them not talk about time management in any capacity. I don't think we've been through a book yet that doesn't at least touch it in some way. But they go through and they spell out three different types of time blocks. One of which he calls it strategic blocks, which I translated to a deep work session. Because he in the book, he calls it as a 3-hour block of uninterrupted time that is scheduled into each week. To me, it's like, okay, if you got 3 hours within a week, that's fine, but there are other ways to do these deep work sessions. I do smaller ones every single day because that works out better for me. And I think that's probably the way you work too. That's why the daily thing works out well, because you end up just building in the habit.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, and that's how I read it at first too. Was that strategic block is a deep work block? I started thinking about that a little bit more though, and I'm thinking that as I implement this in my own calendar, I want to try, because most of my day is built up into those deep work blocks. They're maybe not 3 hours at length, but I want to try to squeeze in a 3 hour quote unquote strategic block where I am literally just thinking big picture about all the things, because I tend to get nose to the grindstone. I've got my task list. I know what needs to get done. And I don't do a very good job a lot of times of taking a step back and seeing the bigger picture. And I think if you're going to develop a big vision, you need time and space to do that. You need time and space to connect the dots in that way, where sometimes, at least in my own life, I don't actually do that. So I'm going to try and implement that strategic block as literally strategy, thinking about what is the big picture goal for this area of my life look like.
See, that's interesting because I'm sitting here reading that paragraph again, and just to make sure I understand it. And he spells out that the purpose is to focus all of your energy on pre-planned tasks. So strategic and money-making activities. So
Yep. So I think by definition you're right, but I like the idea of having a think big block, basically, if you want to put it that way.
I follow that. I think why I'm not seeing it that way is because I do that high-level processing during my weekly review every Friday. So we're recording this on a Friday. I just did it here 4 or 5 hours ago, and that's something that I do once a week, every week already. So I probably didn't think about it that way, because to me it would be something completely different. It's like, oh, I already do that part. I'm going to do something completely separate from that.
So how long does it take you to do your weekly review?
It's about an hour and a half.
Okay. So you probably have a little bit more time than the average person, I think, who would do a
Yeah,
weekly
most
review.
folks I've talked to, I think it's about 30, 45 minutes for most.
Right. And so that's really the thing for me that makes it not fit into that period, is that my weekly reviews will tend to be like an hour at the most.
Hmm.
And I do think that there is a lot of value in just giving yourself space to think big. One of the things that Sean McCabe does is he has what he calls a sabbatical. And he started doing this and he's implemented it now where everybody on his team does the same thing, where they will work for 6 weeks and every seventh week they'll take the entire week off. And he said that the first time that he did it, it felt like a vacation. The second time that he did it, felt like it came way too soon and didn't want to do it because he had more work to do. And then the third time that he did it was kind of when it clicked. And he said that everybody on the team has kind of experienced the same thing. And really the reason behind the sabbatical is that you have a whole week in this case to just think. And that's where a lot of the good ideas come from that drive the business forward.
I completely agree with you. I think I just have a completely different way of coming at it to get at that, because part of what I have within my weekly review is specific actions and in this case someday maybe lists, along with some other meta lists that are designed to call that out. Like that's the point of those, is to say, okay, here are all the things I'm doing in my business. Awesome. Are those the right things? In some cases, no. In some cases, yes. And it forces me to make some of those decisions. But some of what you're referring to, like the creative piece, that's another one of the time blocks that he tells us to put in, is these breakout blocks to make time to let your mind wander, is kind of how I correlated it. The other one that he calls out is buffer blocks, which I translated to our maintenance day that we were talking about from the productivity project, of having that time set out to just keep everything, clear everything to neutral, to use those terms. But I think between those two, and I get what you're saying for the strategic thinking process, I think I just incorporate that elsewhere, and I want to use what I'm calling these strategic blocks, or in this, to me, they're a deep work session, to focus on the work that I've planned for the 12-week goals. That's how I'm seeing them, and I think that's only because some of those other pieces I've already got in place.
Sure,
Maybe.
that makes sense. and honestly, I think the breakout block, you defined it as mind wandering. That is probably your breakout block is probably similar to my strategic block in that sense. But I want to use my breakout block specifically. One of my previous action items was find more time to play.
Right.
I have to force myself to have fun sometimes.
Isn't that pathetic?
It is.
Like we all do this.
Well, and it's hard because like the work that I do honestly enjoy. So it's hard. Like it sounds really lame to say that my work is fun, but it really is.
Well, yeah. When was this? This has probably been 2 months ago or something at this point. My wife was gone on a retreat. So what did I do when she was gone at night? I was writing code. It's what I do all day long. I was writing code so I could rebuild the theme on my own website. It's like, really, Joe? Really?
Right. So my breakout block is, when I say play, like something that I can do for fun that is a complete break from my day-to-day work. So 3 hours doing something other than work during normal business hours is how
Not
I'm
YouTube.
Right. Well, I guess, I mean, for me, maybe YouTube would be good because I'd never go on there. But so that's how I'm defining the breakout block. And I guess just for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with how like this gets implemented, basically he says do a strategic block, which is 3 hours of uninterrupted time. Very important distinction here: no calls, no emails. So if you have your email open, you are not in a strategic block because you will get interrupted. Exactly. So that's a 3 hour block that happens once a week. The buffer blocks are 1 hour blocks that happen twice a day. I've found this to be really intriguing. We launched an email course recently at Agent Efficiency where we made the outrageous claim that will help you process all of your email in 30 minutes a day or less. which I do honestly believe is doable no matter how much email you get. If you have the right systems in place, you can get it down to that time frame. And I've gotten pretty good at managing email in a short period of time, but there's lots of other things like emptying my other inboxes consistently that I forget about or I neglect. And so these buffer blocks are a great idea, in my opinion, to make sure that I follow through with all the administrative stuff that I have to do at any given day. Because if I don't build these in, my tendency is going to be to just continue to work on the business building tasks. But these admin type tasks are important. And so the buffer blocks, and I've put them at the beginning, at the end of my day, those are going to, I believe, really help me follow through and all the maintenance stuff. And then the last one, the breakout block, this is a 3 hours spent on something other than work during normal business hours. So interpret that how you will, but that's a 3-hour block that happens once a week as well.
And out of all of that, the thing that I caught was that Mike doesn't clear his inboxes daily.
Nope. I clear my email inbox daily, but I have a drafts inbox and an NVL inbox where I'll capture things, and I do not go through and process those all the time. Well, when I capture them, usually I'll capture them there, and then a lot of times what'll happen is, I know what this is, so now that I've captured it here, muscle memory, I'm going to send this to the appropriate bucket. Mm-hmm. But then what do I do with that stuff? Like, I let it sit there. And it's not very often that I go through and I clear out my NVAlt because they're just text files. They don't take up any room. In NVAlt, I can search and find things really fast. And really what I just need is the ability to open it and capture something really quickly. So it serves its purpose. But I don't know, like there's something OCD in me that likes to have clean inboxes all the time, even though these ones I'm not really looking at. I just open them up when I need to capture something. I really like the thought of having everything in there cleaned out and reset. And there's just a little bit of, I don't want to say anxiety, but like if I go into drafts and I see that there's 120 things in there, my initial reaction is, did I take care of everything? So I try to periodically.
That's why I was asking, because I clear mine out twice a day. And I can't leave them, because then if I don't keep them clear, I can't know for sure that there's not something I've missed. Like, I have to make sure that I keep things cleaned out. Otherwise, there's a chance that whenever I'm going through and I'm doing my work, I should be doing something else, but I haven't processed it correctly.
Right, and it depends what you use those for. I mean, a lot of times the stuff that I capture there is ideas for things that I want to do sometime maybe in the future, or there's a book that I want to read at some point, or there's a podcast that I want to listen to. They're not generally time-sensitive things. If they are tasks, then I'll send them to OmniFocus right away. But I do like to go through and clean those out. Thing is, I do that whenever I get a chance to, which is more like once a week as opposed to every day. I think there's a benefit to doing it every day. I just don't create the time to do that, because when I am nose down in my work, it seems to me at that specific moment that it is more valuable that I make a little bit more progress on whatever project I'm working on than I take the 15 minutes to go through my NVAlt or drafts inbox, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So 2 points here. One, I only spend 10 minutes on this a day. So 5 minutes in the morning and 5 at the end of my day. So it's not like it's a huge time commitment to pull that off. And two, I think part of that is that, like, part of the reason is because a lot of like the ideas and just snippets of this would work well for this project, like all of those types of little bits of information, I tend to have systems in place specifically through drafts, so that whenever I collect those, they end up where they belong. So there's really not any processing for those to me. Like, they just go exactly where they need to go and I'm done. That might be why because I think maybe I should go look. I think I've only got 5 inboxes that I clear twice a day. And it's like OmniFocus, Dropbox. I can't even think of them right now because it's a checklist. I don't think about it. I just go through the checklist, Mike.
Right. Well, here's really the idea behind this. From the 12-week year on page 55, he talks about failing in our focus. I tend to know that maybe I take the same approach to NV Alt and drafts that other people take to email, but because what I put in there is not other people oriented, I feel like it's not a big deal if I don't get to those right away. But on page 55, he talks about failing to focus, and he says, in an effort to not miss anything, we miss everything. So I don't want to go through and think about all of those random ideas that I had every single day. I would rather focus on getting this specific video done for the email course or whatever, that I don't want to be distracted by all of those little things. So that's probably another piece to it, is that I consciously choose not to go through all those things all the time. But like I said, I really do believe that there is some value to going through it regularly. And I think the big thing for me is that I've never created the time to do that. And so the buffer blocks, that's a real logical one that I could build that in. Email is another one that fits inside of those buffer blocks. Social media account management would fall under there too, if you use that for any sort of business purpose, as opposed to just killing time on Facebook.
Yeah.
I really have to think through some of the other buffer block activities, but I really do like the idea of having a block at the beginning and the end of my day where I can make sure that all the details are taken care of. And then also, if I get stuck in a project and I want that to bleed over a little bit, I've got a little bit more of a margin at the end of my day where I could get that done, as opposed to I'm going to work till 5. I'm going to work till 4, and then from 4 to 5, I've got this buffer or margin where I can either go in and clear out the email inbox, NV Alt drafts, whatever. I can make some progress on those things. Or if I need that extra hour to continue to work on this project because I absolutely need to get it done, I have a little bit of time built in where I can do that. And that whole idea of margin, I think, is really, really important.
Oh, yeah, easy, especially if you schedule a little bit of that around like the strategic blocks or deep work sessions or whatever you want to call those times in the day. With those buffer zones, one specifically that I've put in place, and I did this, it was before I read this book. It's probably been a month and a half ago now. It's because of one of these books we've read at this point, but it wasn't tied, I think, to one in particular. I think it was kind of a combination of them, but we had the one about the shutdown ritual at one point, and I did put that in place, but I put it in place at 4 in the afternoon, and I get off work at 5. Well, it only takes, 15 minutes or so to shut everything down, and that does include my inbox processing, Mike. But I do shut down there at 4 o'clock. Well, that means that, easy, I'm done with that by 4:30. So then I've got 30 minutes after I've, quote unquote, shut down to do pretty much whatever, and that just becomes a buffer zone. And I've just treated it as, well, if I get done early, that's time to read. And it's kind of free time that just lets me float or, get buffer.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the whole idea of margin, you can implement this a lot of different ways. And in fact, later on in the book, he talks about, well, what do you do with the other 4 weeks of the year? What do you do with the 13th week? Because if you were to really boil it down, there's 52 weeks in a year. If you do the 12-week year 4 times, you've got 4 extra weeks there. So he says use the 13th week as a margin where if you don't get everything done in those 12 weeks that you had planned, you've got extra space where that stuff can overlap a little bit and you can actually dot the I's and cross the T's and get that done. I think that is a really key principle. And actually, that's another book that maybe we could cover on the podcast at sometime. But one that I read that was really influential it's actually titled Margin by Richard Swenson. He's a psychology professor. And the whole idea is that people are overcommitted. They overestimate how efficient they are with their time. And then when they overcommit themselves, like they get stuck in the emergency scan modality that David Allen talks about. Like that's the root cause of it, is that we try to schedule every single minute of every single day, and we give ourselves no margin for when things don't go exactly according to plan. And that is when the crap hits the fan, so to speak.
Yeah. I prefer to think of the 13th week as vacation. That's what I would like. It's like I saw that they were talking about the 13th week. I was like, oh, yeah, I hadn't done the math on 12 weeks times 4. It's like, oh, yeah, there is an extra week in there. What do I get to do during that week? Catch up or go have fun. One of those two.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And both of those are important.
Yeah. Like take the first half of it to catch up and take the last 3 or 4 days to, go play.
Right.
One thing that they talk about in the process of developing what you're going to do each week is the concept of lead and lag measures and keeping score.
Mm-hmm.
This is one that I immediately was drawn to because, one, we like to collect data, and I've got a past data analysis person in me, so I've been in that world. So coming from that, I was naturally drawn to this idea of keeping score, and there's been a couple books that have talked about that. I know that it came up in Deep Work at one point, but with the concept here is that you are able to keep track of not only the outcomes at the end of this, did you hit your goal or not, but also keep track of the lead measures, so the process of getting into it. If you take, exercising, for example, I want to lose 10 pounds. If you've ever met me, I should not lose 10 pounds, just saying. But say I did, if I'm going to lose 10 pounds, then the lead measures would be get to the gym, go for a run, those types of things, and being able to keep score on what you're doing at the beginning of it versus did I actually lose 10 pounds or not at the end. So there's the lead versus the lag. Is it leading you into the goal or is it after the goal? And that's the concept of keeping scores, making sure that you're able to keep track of the process both at the beginning and at the end, because if you're keeping track at the beginning, that can be a motivation to keep you going and keep moving forward. So it's just this idea of how do you get the data on this to support, are you making progress or not?
Right. And maybe the best resource that I've found for identifying lead versus lag measures is The 4 Disciplines of Execution by not Stephen Covey. I forget his son. His son is the one who wrote it, though. But the important difference there as it comes to keeping score is that everybody talks about the lead measures, the things that you do to get the results. But when it comes to keeping score, you have to measure your score by those lag measures. So let's use me as an example because I could afford to lose 10 pounds. All right. The lead measures for me are getting to the gym 5 times a week, for example. And the lag measures, how I'm going to keep score is what do I weigh at the end of the 12 weeks, how we're going to apply exercise to the 12-week year concept. And the lead measures are where the 12-week year stuff comes in. Like you're going to plan this stuff out. You're going to create the time on your calendar to do these things that you believe are going to lead you towards your goals. And then at the end of the 12-week period, you're going to look at the lag measures, and that's how you're going to keep score. So very important distinction here when it comes to planning out your day. You have to make sure that it's the little things that you're going to do that are going to produce those compound results. And that's where the whole idea of work-life balance comes in for a lot of people. And there's a quote in here that I really, really liked by Jack Welch. He says, there's no such thing as work-life balance. There are work-life choices, and you make them, and they have consequences. So the work-life choices that you make as you're planning out your 12-week year are going to have consequences, and those consequences are going to be the lag measures that you'll be able to tell, yes, this is moving me towards my goals. No, this is not. And on page 62, they talk about how life balance, so work-life balance, if you want to think of it that way. But again, I don't really like that distinction because in terms of your time, there is no work versus life. There's just your life. Like you have to work within the time that you have given for your life, but it's up to you to make sure that everything is balanced and there's enough attention being given to all the things. So he says on page 62 that life balance is about intentional imbalance. It's about consciously making choices and saying no to certain things that you're determining are not as important as some of those other things. And really, you have to take the time to identify those things that are the right things. That's why he talks at the very beginning of the book about the mission, the vision, the life goals. On page 58, he says, each and every one of us has the God-given ability to be great. What makes a champion is the discipline to do the extra things, especially when you don't feel like it. So this book I really like because I believe that it gives you the tools that you need to 12 weeks at a time identify the things that you're going to say yes to, identify the things that you're going to say no to, and then gives you the structure and the framework, the plan that you need to actually accomplish that. And then once again, obviously the results are going to vary, but it's only going to vary based on whether you follow through and you've identified the right things.
So I've been at this for about 3 weeks now and going through the process. Now, what I did, Mike, because I'm an OmniFocus nerd, is I just went through and replaced what I had in my Horizon 3 project for my getting things done process. I ended up just replacing that with a list of the goals that I wanted to hit for the next 12 weeks. And then underneath of that, I tend to use week numbers on a lot of things. I don't know why. So, what week of the year are we into? I think right now we're on 45. So there you go. If you follow those, what I typically do is like, okay, I just spelled out for each of the goals that I have for the next 12 weeks, here's what I need to hit each week in order to accomplish that goal. And part of the reason I did that was because it allows me to keep score, because I can see very easily did I get these checked off or not. And at the same time, I've got ways that I can use OmniFocus to show me what each week I need to do. So I can easily get a list of what I need to do each week. So I've been at that for at least 3 weeks now. And it's really odd how something as simple as putting together that goal for the next 12 weeks and then spelling out how to get there, it has this natural motivation that can come with it. Because you can see the little bits that you do each day, and you can see the little bits that you accomplish each week. And then once a week going through, or in my case, I end up looking at it daily, just seeing how that relays back to my overall goals. Just naturally, that's got a lot of power in it, and it ends up compounding on itself. And you end up, by the time it's all said and done, accomplishing a lot more. So crazy enough, even within the last 3 weeks, I can honestly say that just from pure numbers of things I've checked off in my system, it's dramatically higher than what it has been or what it was the previous 3 weeks. So if there's a testament to it, there you go.
Now, you may be an outlier because you've been applying a lot of these principles for a while.
I wondered about that, yeah.
So I could totally anticipate somebody listening to this podcast saying, oh, this sounds awesome, I'm going to implement this, and going through what they describe on page 72 as the emotional cycle of change, which is kind of an inverse bell curve, if I'm remembering it right, where there's 5 different steps. Number 1 is uninformed optimism. And if you are just listening to the podcast now and you're like, yeah, this sounds great, I'm going to accomplish all this awesome stuff in the next 12 weeks, that's where you are. And then once you start going, your stuff will become a little bit better defined. And then you go into stage 2, which is informed pessimism.
Yep.
So I know a little bit more. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to do this.
If you look at the chart, it's a pretty steep fall too.
Yes,
it's
yes,
very
it
quick.
is. And then the third step is the valley of despair. This is where many people quit.
Rock bottom.
They get to that point where they're just like, I don't know how I'm going to accomplish this. But if you push through that valley of despair, the next stage is informed optimism. So it's like same concept. Like, you're informed now, you understand the details, but oh, hey, now it looks like because I didn't quit, I might actually achieve this. And then the last one is number 5, success and fulfillment. So a word of encouragement to anybody who's going to listen to this and start implementing it. Hopefully you listen to this again in about 6 weeks and you hear the same words. Like, don't quit when you're in the valley of despair. Don't quit when things look bleak. Continue to trust the system and don't abandon the plan just because you're not seeing the results. They talk a lot about that, about how you don't want to give up on the plan. You only want to give up on the plan when it's the plan's fault, but sometimes you're not going to see the results and it's not the plan's fault. Sometimes the lack of results are your own fault. And so in that instance, what you want to do is you want to keep going. You do not want to give up. On page 166, he talks about the difference between failure, they call it, and failure, where you are going to fall. You are going to mess up. You are going to be in a position where it doesn't look like you're going to be able to achieve this. But he defines the difference, failure as falling and failure as letting go. That's giving up in the valley of despair.
There's a lot in there. Just
There
even
is.
processing that, this is an absolute lot. And I think you're right. I've been at some of these tactics, like the concept of scheduling different blocks of time, and there's a whole bunch that they go through prior to the concept of the 12-week year, and then again after that. That to be honest, I glossed over a lot of it. I didn't mean to. It just kind of worked out that way. But the reason was that it's a lot of rinse and repeat for a lot of these other books and principles that we've talked about,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it hard to read for me, but it's still valuable if you've not been through that. So I understand why it's there. It was just a part that if we weren't reading it for the show, I probably would have skipped probably 3 or 4 chapters there. But all of that said, the principles that they're talking about are highly valuable, and going through the process of the 12-week year itself, like, if you have some of these other, what your mission is, how to develop your goals. Like, I sat down and in 20 minutes had cranked out what I thought my life goal for each of my areas of responsibility was going to be. Like, it was pretty quick and very easy for me to do that. And doing that process is what made it possible for me to go ahead and put together some goals for the next 12 weeks and then develop what they were going to be. So I spent maybe an hour putting this whole thing together, and was able to just slip it right into the rest of how I do things, and get off to the races with it. So it was pretty easy for me to just drop it in and go. But I can easily see if you don't have that base structure in place, there's a lot of work to do just to get going. Whereas it took an hour for me, I could easily see it take a couple days just of working with it and thinking it through to get going with it. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. And there's going to be some trial and error, I think, if you've never really done this before. Like on page 95, he talks about the 5 criteria of good plans. And so this is stuff that if you're immersed in the productivity space, you've probably heard all of this stuff previously. But he lays it out, or they lay it out rather succinctly. Number 1, make your plans specific and measurable. You have to be able to measure whether they're successful. Number 2, state them positively. So this is a really important step. For example, if you're a golfer and you're teeing off and you see a water hazard and you're thinking to yourself, don't hit it in the water, don't hit it in the water. Psychologically, it's proven you're probably going to hit it in the water because your brain can't differentiate between positive and negative. It's just seeing that the water is the thing that you're focusing on. So instead of saying like, don't do this, you want to state your plans as positive. Number 3, ensure that they are a realistic stretch. So you want them to be able to be accomplished, but you also want them to not be easy. You want to be able to have to push in order to accomplish that. Number 4, assign accountability. And then number 5, be time bound. If you're looking at a 12-week period, that one's pretty easy. But even if you've heard this stuff before, there's some stuff like I gleaned on page 101. There was a detail here that I never really caught before. He says, if you take the time to plan before you engage with a complex task, you reduce the overall time required to complete the task by as much as 20%, which I thought was really, really interesting. Number 1, because I'm kind of a data nerd, I guess, where we've talked before in the podcast. I like the ones like the willpower instinct where they have all the research studies to support what they're saying. So this is a quantifiable number that's attached to this where it's saying, yes, you do want to plan this stuff before, not because it seems like the right thing to do, but because it is statistically proven that it will take 20% less time if you follow through beforehand and you identify everything that needs to be done.
So for listeners who are wanting to get into programming, or you are in coding in some form, pay attention to what what you're saying there, because this is something I do very regularly, and it's something that I'm learning is very particular and specific to quality programmers, is that you will often take some time to think through the functions and the methods that you're going to write before you do it, instead of just jumping in and writing something to see if it'll work. Because it seems like 9 times out of 10, if you stop and think about it before you jump into it, you actually come up with a better solution that's, 1, more optimized, so it runs faster and cleaner, and 2, is less buggy. And, those are 2 gold standards that you shoot for as a programmer. So if you take the time to step back and review something you're going to do before you jump into it, you save yourself a lot of headaches later on.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I really like the whole emphasis of this in this whole book on you determining your own future. And you can apply that to any arena you want, whether it's code or writing or cranking widgets at a factory. Like literally, they place the onus on you over the next 12 weeks. Like if you want a different future, you can go ahead and you can create it. In fact, on page 138, it says that the future that you're going to live is the one that you are creating right now at this very moment. Another thing they say is that a victim allows his success to be limited by external circumstances, people, or events. So I'll just use this example, and I mean nothing negative by it, but it seems like there's a lot of people that I've met who are working a quote unquote regular job, and they see what I do and they say, oh, that's great. I would love the opportunity to do that, but it's just not going to happen for me. Like I don't see how that could happen. And I would challenge them. I challenge you, if you're listening to the podcast and that's you, like what you've got to do if you want to change your situation is you have to start doing those little things. For me, it was having a vision of where I wanted to go. And then what that looked like in terms of the day-to-day was making the choice to become a morning person, overcoming my natural adversity to waking up early and creating the space to do the writing, which has led me to a point where I never thought that I would be. I mean, I never considered myself a writer, but every opportunity I've gotten over the last couple of years has to do with things that I've written. So really the key here is that you can continue to do the things that you have always done, but you will continue to get the same results if that is the case. If you want a different future, you have to change the things that you do day to day. And the 12-week year is a great way to do that. On page 139, he says, people earning $1 million per year aren't working 10 times harder than people earning $100,000. In fact, they are sometimes working less, but they are working differently. So if you're not happy with the results that you've gotten, change the process, change the things that you are doing. And I think the 12-week year is a great way to start working differently if you want to see some different results.
You ready for action items?
Let's do it.
So I have one. Try the 12-week year.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you could break it down a little bit more, I guess. That's kind of what I did. Like I've already implemented some of the time blocks,
Right.
but I have not taken the whole 12-week period. I will, though. I will do it at January 1, or by January 1, I'm going to have my plan for the next 12 weeks. And it makes so much sense. My wife and I did something similar to this a couple years ago where we had a yearly goals, and then we broke it down into quarterly goals, and then even monthly goals from there. But this makes more sense to me than trying to have 3 separate sets of goals and making sure that they're lining up.
Right.
So
Right.
yes, absolutely. I guess if you were to boil it down to one thing, it would definitely be implement the 12-week year.
Yeah.
Because it's really not that hard. Like a lot of this book is the reasonings behind the principles that they're teaching and why things are going to work if you apply this. But the actual method is not that hard.
Yeah, it was only, I think, maybe 3 chapters out of the entire book is the actual process. The rest of it was, 1, explaining why you should do it, and 2, explaining some of the mindsets and principles on how to get yourself to do work. Like that, that seemed to be how it all panned out. Because, I could write some things down of how to put, when am I going to do a strategic block of time? When am I going to put in buffer and breakout blocks? But I already do a lot of that. Like that would be cop out, I think, because it's not anything different than what I'm already doing. And that's why I think just implement the 12-week year. Oddly enough, the way I timed it, and part of the reason I was itching to get into it is because I knew that based on the timing that if I jumped into it when I did, it worked out to where the end of my 12-week year equated to the end of the calendar year. That's why I jumped in when I did. So that means that at the end of December, my 12-week year is up. So that's why I jumped in early, partially just because pure math. And I'm weird and I'm type A like that, and I like it to be clean. So there we go.
That would have made sense if I would have realized that a few weeks earlier, but yeah.
Math is something I've always enjoyed. In college, I took advanced calculus based physics. Yep, weird. I know.
I took sports
So
economics.
there you go. So I thought this was pretty easy to read. I mean, it's an easy book for I think just about anybody to pick up and go through. They explain things quite simply and in a way that's easy to comprehend. So I thought it was a simple. They've got a good style.
Yeah, I really like the style. The only thing I would say is I was a little bit distracted sometimes. I don't feel that this one is as well written as some of the other books that we've read, which really has nothing to do with the takeaways that you will get from this, but it was a little bit distracting for me because sometimes I'd read sentences and be like, well, wait, that's not grammatically correct.
Yes, I
So
did notice that in a few cases. So I was like, oh, you guys, what you have here is good, but I feel like you've not been a writer for long.
yeah,
But
which again, like I am not a writer. Maybe I am now, I guess, since I've been doing it for a little while, but I've never considered myself a writer. Like I really can't hold that against them, but just being like completely transparent. That's the only thing I saw in this book is that sometimes I would lose track of what they were saying because of how they said it.
yeah, I'm not a part of the grammar police force, so I'm not one to like. I don't really get upset when I see things like that. I just chalk it up to they're learning. It's
Right.
like, oh, and it's encouraging to me because I notice it's like, oh yeah, that's not like you don't use a semicolon like that. That doesn't work. Like I'll notice
Yeah.
those, but it's like, oh yeah, I know how that works.
Right. Yeah. But overall, I would say it's a really, really good book. It's very, very actionable. It is not hard to read at all. And I think it's applicable to just about anybody. So unless like you've heard about the 12-week year concept before and are already applying it, I would say this is definitely worth your time. It's not, again, the concepts are great, but it's not like the best book that we've ever read. So for
Yeah,
that reason alone, I'm going to say 4.5.
yeah. I'm gonna give it a 4, just because there's a lot of things that I feel like could have been written better or a little more in depth. It's a fairly short book, and it seemed like they were trying to stretch to put it into a book at times. So I just there's some things that just don't quite feel right with it, but that's where I landed. So you got a 4.5, I got a 4.0, so it's 4.25 overall. So upcoming books, I so my choice coming next, I picked Brain Chains. This is one that's been recommended a handful of times. People have been itching to get us to go through this, and I have started reading this. I'm excited to talk about this one. There's going to be a lot to talk about for this one, Mike.
Nice. Yeah, I've had this one. Honestly, this one was gifted to me a while ago, and I've been meaning to dig into it, but haven't yet. So I'm excited about this one as well. But I believe that this one is going to be one of the more meatier books that we've read.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. This one I won't be like I've gotten to where I read books in about a week. This one will not be done in a week, guaranteed.
Right. Yeah, this one looks pretty substantial. And then the one after that, I saw this on the recommended list, and this was actually one that I had bought a while back. I was in or near the Chicago area for a wedding one time, and I saw this bookstore across the street. So naturally, I had to go, and they sold books by the pound.
What?
So yeah, it's this cool little bookshop near the Northwest University campus, and yeah, like you could go and you could pick out as many books as you want, and then like it was so much per pound. It was like a fish market for books.
That's crazy. I
So
know. Wow. You need to let me. Oh, that sounds like fun. I know our library sells books by the bag. I think it's like $4 a bag or something like that.
Okay,
But it's like
cool.
grocery sack type. But anyway,
Yeah, so one of the ones that I picked up there because I could buy books by the pound was the Checklist Manifesto,
crazy.
just because I thought the concept sounded very interesting.
When was
And
this?
this was maybe 4 or 5 months ago.
Okay. I was thinking maybe you were going to say 4 or 5 years ago. And I was thinking, well, did you get it before you got into productivity? I was curious.
No, but I bought it because I just bought everything that that looked interesting at the store since I could get them by the pound. And it's been on my shelf for a while, and I keep looking at it. I'm like, oh, I need to read that because I've heard a little bit of stuff in the productivity space about the power of making lists and checking things off. And I've not really been able to articulate it really well to some of the other people in my life where I'm kind of like preaching the benefits of OmniFocus and stuff like that. And people are like, well, why should I do that? Like, I think this book is going to have the reasoning behind all of the whole approach that I use and validation for things that I've done. And then also maybe it'll tweak some of the processes and the day-to-day stuff on how I implement it. So, yeah, looking forward to this one. It's by Atul Gawande. Is that how you say it?
That's about as close as I could get with it.
Okay. Sorry if I mispronounce your name, Mr. Gawande.
I'm excited about that one as well. I've been a list maker for a long time, and I'm getting more and more into checklists. So I'm kind of curious to see if I could do it better, or what I guess I don't think I could fully comprehend, or well, maybe I can comprehend, but I can't articulate how, like, what the value is behind it. But this is kind of an odd case here, Mike. We've got these two books are both ones that were recommended to us, so that's kind of fun. It's fun that we can start to pick up some of these that other folks are interested in. So, for the listeners, if there's one that you want us to get into that we haven't jumped into yet, the way that we got those recommendations is through the website, so bookworm.fm. You can go there. In the sidebar, there's a link for recommend a book, or if you want, it's bookworm.fm/recommend. So that's how you can get there. And if you want to see the ones that we have had recommended or the ones we finished, some of them that we're planning to get through, same place, /list. You can see the book list on our website as well. So both of those are out there, and that's where we're keeping track of all the books in our queue.
And if you enjoy Bookworm and you would be willing to do us a small favor, we would really appreciate it if you would go over to iTunes and leave us a review, because that will help more people find out about the show, and hopefully more people can benefit from going through the podcast book club together.
Awesome. So again, the next book up is Brain Chains. If you're into a heady, long read and you can keep up with us in 2 weeks, this one I think it's 460 some pages long. So it's a long one. So if you want to follow along with us, you can pick that one up. Or if you want to skip this one, the next one up is the Checklist Manifesto. But coming up next is Brain Chains. So if you want to read along, we'll jump into that one and we will talk with you next time.